Thank you so much for joining us today, Atira.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I was so glad that you were up for coming on because I saw that Aya Healing Retreats, which is a center that I admire a lot because they're doing a lot of things with workshops and helping spread different lineages. But I saw that they were putting on a trauma informed workshop helping people understand that form of therapy. So if you could start just by telling the listeners and me a little bit about what trauma informed means.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lynn Marie. So, as most of you know, entering a plant medicine space is a huge, profound space of healing. And within, this profound healing space, there's a lot of trauma that comes up. So, I guess simply put, being trauma informed, it means that we understand how trauma affects the nervous system. How does it work in a way which is physiological? And so therefore, as plant medicine facilitators, we understand trauma, the foundations of trauma from that standpoint, and we interact with the participants who we're holding space for in a way which is sensitive to that understanding. So some of the trauma-informed principles, okay, firstly, we assume that all participants who join us in a ceremonial space have experienced some kind of trauma. So we call them big T's or little T's. So they're either like big traumas or little traumas. Because if you think about it, life is suffering. And a lot of people think about trauma as being in war or experiencing something like a boundary violation with violence. But actually, trauma is something that happens to us. And just being in this world and being in this life and being human, yeah, we get affected by things around us, and we have experiences that being human affect us deeply. So therefore, anyone that's walking into a ceremonial space deserves to be treated with the care and sensitivity with this understanding of trauma. Yeah. So
I'm going to pause you for 1 second.
yeah.
Your earrings are hitting the microphone.
Oh, I'm so
That's
sorry.
okay. I think it's your earrings.
Good call.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Should we
Continue.
start again?
No, no, no.
Yeah.
Because I just noted an edit mark that I will, it wasn't so that it wasn't terrible, but I just knew it was like it was. I'm sensitive to sound, so I was like, if I am, maybe other people are. We're good. We're good. Continue.
Okay. So with this first premise, that everybody, we assume that everyone that's entered a ceremonial space, has experienced big T's or little T's. We also understand that participants that come may be hyper aroused, that make them really super sensitive or easily triggered, either by sounds or darkness or the way that we speak or how the facilitator facilitates a ceremony. Perhaps, the facilitator has a personality that's a very authoritarian kind of personality, because language can really kind of affect our sense of arousal, especially if we've experienced something like, complex trauma in our lives, or if we had, a situation where someone had taken away control, again, choice and agency away from us. Yeah. Or perhaps they may come to the ceremonial space feeling really shut down or easily overwhelmed or confused. And this may include their experience in an altered state of consciousness on plant medicine or not. So therefore, how we respond to these participants in this field of plant medicine, we need to consider these experiences and what people have and provide support as they arise instead of increasing arousal or isolation and overwhelm, which is what I kind of see unfortunately happen in plant medicine spaces because this understanding is not kind of consolidated or kind of understood. So some of the interventions that we might provide, in the plant medicine space may not be trauma informed and therefore lead to either more arousal or either more shutdown. And so we want to be trauma informed means that we are sensitive to all these different things and we understand the physiology of trauma, how it arises, and also how to respond effectively in that space and before, during, and after a ceremony. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's what happens.
Gotcha. Thank you
to
for
be
that.
trauma informed.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I hadn't kind of thought about how just the setup of the ceremony itself may be altered depending on the needs of the people who are in it. And that brings me to a question. If somebody is coming to a ceremony, and like you said, we all have little t, like for example, we're all having COVID little t, whether or not we think
Right.
about it actively. But like you said, there are people with the big traumas. If you are somebody who knows you're coming in with a big trauma, maybe that's what you're trying to address, or you just know that it may trigger you. Is that something like how should you address that with the people offering the ceremony?
Right. So really, I mean, from a very idealistic point of view, what I'm advocating for is that it's really important to kind of screen and assess participants before they come into ceremony. So there needs to be a whole kind of focus on preparation and not just kind of doing a medical intake, but also mental health intake because mental health is such an important part of being human, and it's also one of the most, how to say, misunderstood things I think in health, because you can't see mental health issues like medical issues. So I believe that first of all, what needs to change to be a little bit more trauma informed in the way that we're running circles or plant medicine is to go through a really thorough kind of assessment to kind of see, what's this person's background, what are their sensitivities, and through an intake form, through a preparation call or so on and so forth, you are able to kind of identify or understand, what kind of person, this is, what kind of resources they have, how resilient they are. The intention is also really important, like what intentions they want to work on. And so with most people, like when they come to a medicine ceremony, if they come with an intention, most of the time I've seen is connected to some kind of trauma in the past. Okay, so a lot of people come because they want to walk their truth or their purpose in life, and they know their purpose in life, but something is blocking them. And if you trace and if you map that block to something that happened in their life that created that block, is usually trauma related. So by kind of gathering more information about how people are and why they're coming into the retreat and what traumas they're experiencing, like you'll be able to understand the kind of care they need, the support they need during the ceremony and also like after the ceremony, because that's really important as well. So I feel that it's really like, it's very interesting in the plant medicine world because it's highly unregulated and it's not kind of governed by code of ethics or so everything's kind of unregulated, so there's in a way kind of too much freedom, not enough structure to create the safety, because boundaries are really important in safety, especially in trauma, because trauma happens when there is a boundary violation. You really wanted to say no, but then something came and you didn't have choice or agency, and then you lose your sense of connection to yourself and others because you're overwhelmed. And so it's really important that, participants that come, they have choice and they have agency and they feel safe. And in order to feel safe, boundaries are really, really important. And I believe that is actually the facilitators, from a trauma-informed lens, is the facilitator that holds the duty of care in these spaces. Because a traumatized person, like, depending on what kind of trauma they've been through, they don't even really know how they feel and what they want, because the definition of trauma, simply put, I'm quoting Peter Levine, is that trauma simply arises when there is a lack of choice or something from which we feel unable to escape. It's overwhelming for the nervous system, and therefore it leads to a disconnection with ourselves and others, and it affects our abilities to be present. So for some people, if they've, depending on what trauma they've been through, they don't really have that connection to themselves, and so therefore they don't really know how to either express themselves, what is a yes, what is a no, and to be fair and honest, like it's hard for these people to kind of take a responsibility to share with their facilitators unless they have kind of walked the healing journey for a while and they know what's happening for them and why and so on and so forth. If a participant or individual hasn't been through that journey and it's first time to the medicine, they come into a new environment, doing plant medicine is something which is a mystery. So it brings up a lot of anxiety. It's very difficult for these people to kind of communicate how, what their trauma experience was. And there are a lot of facilitators where, you just meet them. There's no kind of relationship that's being created before you kind of drink the medicine. Or partake in an altered state of consciousness. So I feel that the way how, ceremonies or, plant medicine sessions are facilitated, the facilitator needs to take on that responsibility to ask the person and get as much information as possible so that they can be well informed to create those safe spaces, which is really important.
It sounds like you're, and I totally agree with this. It sounds like you're advocating at least some kind of phone call or something beforehand, because in lieu of a phone call, sometimes you would get like a questionnaire or something, and the questionnaire can never really cover what a one-on-one phone call could. The questionnaire is, and often they're more like kind of, seems like they're medical screening, like, are you on any medications? Do you have any diagnoses? But people with trauma may not have gone and gotten a diagnosis of PTSD or anxiety or anything associated with the trauma. And so they may just keep that silent. And so it sounds, if I'm hearing what you're saying, sounds like that one-on-one conversation is probably the best way to go about that.
Yeah, the one-on-one conversation, and also like what I found really useful is asking people what the intentions are, because it can be like quite daunting, like someone that you don't know, you're going in for a ceremony and suddenly, like the person's like bringing out, a flip chart or, a sheet of, all these like mental health issues. So what I normally do is like I ask people, so what's your intention for coming to this retreat, or what's your intention for coming to this session? And usually the person will start to say, well, I'm suffering from A, B, and C in my life. And as you kind of explore a little bit deeper with these people, you start to uncover, their backgrounds, their histories, their trauma histories, and they start to tell you in a way which is kind of building rapport and a relationship, which creates safer spaces for the plant medicine work to happen. It's all about building relationships. It's all about feeling, safe with the person that's leading and the environment, the group of people that you're with. And unfortunately, that doesn't really happen that often. I think it depends on the context of the plant medicine work, but a lot of the time, you get an email, you come to a center and or a place for a weekend, and then it's goodbye and see you later. So I think that despite whatever context is in, to have that preparation call and to get to know the participants, especially newcomers that have never taken in a session with you as a facilitator, I think that's important to kind of build that relationship first and get a little bit more information.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was thinking as you were talking before about, there are some things in ceremony that could, I wouldn't say set off trauma, but kind of set off a reaction in people who have experienced significant trauma, or maybe even just lower forms of trauma. And I'm thinking how in a lot of these ceremonies, sometimes there are a number of other people, maybe people we don't know, and a lot of the plant medicine ceremonies involve noise and sometimes painful noises, because you may be in your own journey and the person next to you may be, perhaps screaming or purging in some other way. Can you talk a little bit about the considerations? I know I'm pretty sensitive to sound, not related to trauma, but just in life. And I can imagine if somebody who, has PTSD and loud sounds would set them off, how would they be, able to be cared for in that kind of ceremonial setting? So if you could talk a little bit about those considerations.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, being a trauma-informed facilitator is being really sensitive and aware of things that can kind of re-trigger people. Like, for example, being in a dark space re-triggers people. It can trigger people. So imagine, like, say, a survivor of sexual violence, and if they were, being violated in the dark at home, being in those spaces can be really kind of scary. for them, or not having, a sense of control, agency, or where they sit, in the space. And also part of that, and what's re-triggering could be sounds for sure. And people kind of screaming, or people kind of crying, or going through those experiences could definitely be really, triggering. So I think what could be important for facilitators is to name that, before a ceremony starts, and to say, okay, it's a dark space, and, we understand that it might be triggering for some people. And at times, people need to purge, and some of the purge that happens comes through sound. So therefore, if you're feeling triggered, instead of sitting there and being more triggered, this is some of the things that you can do. You can either, knock on the floor, or, find help so that someone can really help you to regulate. Or, you can ask around if somebody's sensitive to sound in this way. And then perhaps the person that's making a lot of sound, like if they're screaming or so on and so forth, they might need to be regulated, or they might, need some extra support from the support people in order to kind of calm them down, or maybe take them out of the room momentarily. But to kind of name the triggers that may come up first, and then, have a discussion on that, so that people have kind of choice and agency on how to respond and react, instead of, just kind of leaving it open, might be really important from a trauma-informed lens.
That makes sense. I remember before my first ayahuasca ceremony, they were like, you'll hear people purging, but they're not in pain. And that I remember that was an important thing to hear. So, because I knew that because that's, when you hear people retching and purging, if you heard that on a normal day on the sidewalk, you would probably feel something for them, some empathy or compassion, or even sad for them, or want to rush over and help. And it's like setting that stage of like, this is going to happen. Nothing bad is going on. That I thought that was really helpful. And so I'm guessing the same thing with trauma is like, let's talk about all of the things that you may hear and you may feel, maybe not, I mean, obviously not all, because you can't prepare for everything, but I'm imagining that would help somebody feel a lot safer, especially when they pop up, because it's not nearly a surprise. And I think that would be the shocking part if it came out of nowhere.
Yeah. It's basically, thinking about maybe what's going to help create the safest container in this space on all levels. So sound's one of them, talking about, if someone's going through a really difficult journey, and if do they want to be touched? Do they not want to be touched? Do they provide consent? And for things like supportive touch, like a holding of a hand, or a hand on back, do they want mapacho to be blown on them? Do they not? Because when we enter this altered state of consciousness, it's really difficult to kind of communicate your boundaries of what you want. So I think, as part of like the trauma-informed lens, facilitators need to kind of think about what's important to be communicated first. And a lot of it comes from screening. So through screening, you will kind of understand the trauma backgrounds of people and what you need to kind of watch out for. And through those things that inform you, you can say, okay, so in this particular group of people, this person experienced this and this and this. So therefore, we need to speak and name A, B, and C in order to create a safe space, with the person's consent, of course. So you don't even have to say a name. You can just, say, okay, in this space, this may happen. If this may happen, this is these are the safety protocols that are going to come. Someone's going to come up to you. They're going to, ask you what's happening. They might, ask you to be present with your breath. There's all these kind of different things that can be helpful for people before a ceremony. And sometimes, most of the time, in an altered state of consciousness, you forget about those things, but it's still important to kind of name them so that there is a sense of ease for participants as they enter the space.
Yeah, I love that you brought up consent, because it reminds me of, I think Lisa Ling had done a CNN documentary on a group of veterans, I think many with post-traumatic stress, who'd gone down for an ayahuasca ceremony, and many of them had good experiences, but the one who was really, and I think eventually he came around it and found healing in some way, but in one of the earlier ceremonies, he was so angry because somebody had blown smoke in his face. And I think that's a great point. Like you said, somebody with trauma, don't just go up and blow smoke. And basically with anybody, because you don't know if maybe they have a smoke allergy. Like, just start off asking those kind of the big things. Are you okay with substances being blown in your general direction? How about touch? I love that you brought that up because I think that's probably huge in giving people
It is
agency.
huge. Yeah, and in this workshop that I'm running with eye healing retreats in June and August, we talk a little bit about trauma-informed plant medicine principles. So there's a whole bunch of plant medicine principles, and one thing that you need to understand with trauma is that it happens because of a lack of choice. So people's sense of choice and agency and empowerment is taken away from them. So the antidote to that is actually giving people choice. And part of giving people choice and agency is really about consent. So so that's kind of a really important principle, I think, for people to kind of take away. If it's only like one or two things to take away, it's the importance of empowering individuals to have choice and consent, and to have the ability to kind of say no or to say yes instead of assuming that it's okay.
Yeah, not a one size fits all ceremony for everybody. I like that.
Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about what trauma informed integration would look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the integration process is really, really important. And as Elio and I kind of share, at eye healing retreats, we feel that the work really starts after the ceremony. That's really where the integration happens. It's where, you get to embody the insights and the things that you've learned from the ceremony into your daily life. And without that integration, it just becomes an experience that, fades into your memory, perhaps. And it becomes, yeah. So what we're striving for at eye healing retreats is really kind of this embodied, this where the embodied insight, I suppose. Yeah, so that the healing that you experience in ceremony doesn't just kind of fade away, but it becomes part of your nervous system. It becomes part of you, and it's a living reality. So that's what we strive for. And the importance of trauma and the understanding of trauma is uh, with a lot of individuals, they enter the plant medicine space, and more often than not, a lid comes off. Memories or traumatic memories or experiences, because what I feel, especially in ayahuasca or other plant medicines, what it does is that it works on an implicit memory level. So it can bring up, memories that we forgot because it might have happened in infancy, it might have happened in, during the time before the neocortex of the brain was kind of formed properly. So it brings out these memories in terms of sensations and feelings. And with a lot of people, they don't remember what happened to them in childhood, especially if they've had like a traumatic childhood. And then usually, or sometimes, in the ceremonial spaces, that memory comes out where they're feeling scared, or they're feeling like they're under attack, or they feel like they want to die, or, it's confusing for them, and so on and so forth. So with this kind of lid of the Pandora box kind of taken out and lifted, it can be really intense for these people to go back into their own lives with the lid kind of popped off. And for many of them, they need some extra kind of therapy, or they need what I call like an integration therapist that understands the nervous system, the physiology, to help integrate and sometimes resolve the trauma that came up for them in the ceremony. So I believe that that's what trauma-informed integration is that we understand, okay, the physiological signs of trauma, what's happening for the person, okay, how are they integrating or coping with what happened in the ceremony, if it was a traumatic experience or not, like how are they coping with it, and how, more importantly, how are they resolving, the traumatic experiences that came out for them in the ceremony, okay? Because if not, it would be like someone ripping off the Band-Aid from your hand, and then there's just like a pussy wound. And then, okay, you drink a little bit of, you drink some medicine and but you go home and there's still like kind of a pussy wound still there. So the trauma-informed integration therapist would come and, basically help heal the wound so that it can heal and the band-aid is not, needed anymore, instead of putting another band-aid on there and putting another, do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
really about helping the person recover from the trauma that arose into their awareness. And a lot of this work in integration is shadow work, because many people who have been through these sessions, plant medicine sessions, a lot of them feel that they are reborn, or like they're kind of like a newborn baby, or they've been through some kind of rebirth or spiritual awakening, and then they go back into their lives that they had before, but their lives have dissonance, from who they are in that huge transformation and awakening. And that in itself can be traumatic when you're so open, and you go back to, environment which can be really, uneaseful, unsafe. Yeah.
That makes a lot
So
of
part
sense.
of trauma-informed integration is really understanding and helping people through that, and reaching a place of recovery and resolution instead of re-traumatization, which can happen more often than not.
That makes so much sense. I had never thought about the fact that if a trauma came up in the ceremony, it's not like it comes up and then that same ceremony you were able to work through it. You're going to come out of that ceremony probably with a fresh wound, like you said, and
Mm,
that does need a lot of care, because a lot of
hmm.
times we think, okay, we go in with our wound, we think plant medicine is going to hopefully help us um, find some healing around it, but if you come out with a new one, that's a whole nother scenario. So thank you for bringing that up. I know we hadn't discussed this before, but one thing I'd love to ask you about before we talk a little bit about the workshop is just, we're all in this COVID quarantine time, and many people have brought up that this is like a collective trauma we're all going through, whether or not people are realizing it. But you can see just the reactions. People are angry, or they're scared, or they're fearful. Can you talk just a little bit about maybe ways to, you're talking about bringing the nervous system back to a more homeostasis place. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe people in these times, like undergoing an active trauma that doesn't seem to have an obvious end, what can we do to kind of keep balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do feel that this COVID thing is a big T. It's not just a little T. There's something that, it's scary what's happening out in the world, like, yeah, and the fact that we are in kind of social isolation, we're not able to kind of be free and go out and do what we need to do, can bring up a lot of past traumas as well. So, for example, if we've grown up in backgrounds that have been really lonely and isolating, where we haven't really had the care and attention that we've needed, as little ones, during this time, it could really retrigger a lot of very painful emotions and feelings and memories, which can be kind of connected to this time. And what's happening with COVID is that there is no, if you're living at home alone in an apartment, there's no even like human touch. There's no kind of like, connection. We can do connection through a screen, but really, like, sometimes what we need is a hug and a cuddle. And that, genuine human connection, that can be extremely triggering for people to go through like a long time without that. So I think that it's pretty intense what's happening to the world in the world today. And some tips that I would love to share is basically creating, I think that this is a time where, in order to regulate ourselves, we need to be very connected to our inner resources and our outer resources. So, because this is such a big kind of trauma vortex in a way, what's going to balance this big trauma vortex is to amplify the healing vortex. And when I talk about the healing vortex, is anything that we can connect to within ourselves, or anything that we do as an activity, or community, which is external, that can really increase our sense of pleasure, increase our sense of feeling safe, and at home in ourselves, increase our sense of belonging, increase our sense of feeling strength and resilience. So I would really encourage people to use this time to do what they love doing. So a good thing is maybe writing a list of, 10 things, that activities that you can do that you give you pleasure, that calm you down, that you really enjoy, that helps you to be in your body, that helps you to be with your breath, that helps you to, stay grounded. And then also to, do practices that can help you to elicit a felt sense of safety inside of yourself. So it could be like a meditation where you imagine being in a safe environment with the people that you love, and then also noticing the feelings and the sensations in your body of safety, and allow yourself to slow down and to take in and receive those sensations of safety or support or groundedness. Um, Connecting to your own sense of like strength and resilience, remembering times where you were, strong and you did overcome your obstacles. What was that felt sense like to, overcome a certain obstacle or challenge in your life, and that freedom that you felt after? So to connect on a sensational level, on a felt sense level, to those memories and things that help to increase and amplify that healing vortex is something that's really important, I think, for people now. Yeah. And another thing that I would really suggest is, because this is a pretty isolating time, I think it's really important for people to reach out and get support. And it's easy, I think, for us to stay, one of the signs of trauma is that, we feel that we're alone because we're disconnected from ourselves and the people around us. So for those at home who are going through a hard time, I would invite you to, write a list of 5 people that you could perhaps connect to or reach out to and share, what's happening for you. And I think that the community support is one of the best antidotes for creating resilience.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that idea. I have a list in my bathroom of things I love to do in case I ever forget. Like, sometimes when you're having a down day, it's hard to remember, like you said, to put yourself back in what would bring me up. But I think it was 3 years ago I wrote that list, and it's been sitting there forever. Like, okay, oh yeah, I used to like to crochet, or let's go dance,
Great.
solo dance party, So
Nice.
I
Nice.
appreciate you bringing that up as a way to get through this time. Before we go, could you just tell us a little bit about the trauma informed facilitator workshops you all are hosting?
Yeah, so we're running a 4-day trauma-informed plant medicine facilitation workshop, and this is a really, really great workshop because it covers it's a very thorough workshop that covers a whole bunch of important kind of content that can really help, I think, you as a facilitator or a support person or an integration therapist or somebody that is, a helper, to really understand what's coming up in the field, in the medicine ceremony, and how to respond effectively to it. So the first part of it, I talk a little bit about shamanism, plant medicine, and the Western paradigm of mental health. And we talk a little bit about the crossovers, like where is the bridge and where do they meet? And what is the new kind of paradigm of trauma-informed plant medicine? What does that look like? And then the next part, we talk a little bit about trauma. So we talk about the nervous system in trauma, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and social engagement. So we talk a little bit about, just how trauma shows up in the body and how we, as organisms, respond to it. Then we talk a little bit about, or I share how to identify the different kinds of trauma. Yeah, because it's really, trauma shows up in many different ways, and you can see it, in a person's body language and the types of trauma, because trauma is not just a one size fits all. There are different types of trauma, and with different types of categories of trauma, you want to respond differently. So I talk a little bit about that, and also the essential elements of trauma recovery. Then I go a little bit more deeply into facilitation. So we talk about your duty of care, your role of facilitator, the principles of, trauma-informed facilitation. We talk about trauma-informed language, how to use language which is not triggering for trauma survivors. We talk about things like boundaries, safety, consent, choice, and agency, and even the dosage of the medicine, and how the body is so key, and how we can see the signs and symptoms of trauma and the different categories of trauma in the body and how to respond to that. We talk a little bit about using supportive touch as a resource, and also what to look for in screening and assessments, and also post-ceremony and integration. So it's a really kind of very thorough workshop that I'm cramming into 4 days. But this module 1 is the first module and the essential kind of foundations to module 2 and module 3. So module 2 will focus only on assessments and screenings and preparation. And then module 3 is going to focus more on post-ceremony and integration care. So for this upcoming workshop in June, it will just be kind of the foundations, the core essentials that you need to know about trauma. And the focus is really about facilitation. Yeah. So what kind of interventions do we intervene? How much support do we offer? So on and so forth.
Wow, that sounds so comprehensive. I think
It
that's going to be
is.
fascinating for people to take. And I just really appreciate this conversation. I have learned so much. As far as trip sitting, all I've ever done is Zendo volunteer. But I think even those principles, just learning what I've learned from this call, could definitely be helpful in those kinds of situations. Can you tell people where to find the information about the workshop?
Yeah, if you log on to www.ayahealingretreats.com, you'll be able to find all of this information online.
Fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Atira. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn Marie.
Absolutely. For everybody else out there, until next time.